Here at Minionville's Festivus event, I'm joined now by Michael Pinto of Euro Pacific Capital and Todd Harrison. He's the CEO of Minionville, and I know this is a charity event. It's for the kids, holiday cheer. I was hoping to spur a little debate between you guys because, Michael, you've been hardcore saying we are going to have inflation coming down the pike. And Todd, many times we've spoken, you say you think deflation first. Is that still your point of view?
Well, I said ultimately deflation. So I think when we talk about the stock market, we got to talk about the stock market, and then we got to talk about, well, what is the stock market now comprised of? So the stock market, left to its own devices, I think we can all agree would be an inflationary spiral or going through that process, that medicine of debt destruction or debt reorganization. But with all this synthetic sweetener that's in the marketplace, obviously, it's been propping up. We're seeing it in commodity prices, and we're seeing inflation in things that we need. But I still think we're seeing deflation in things that we want. So grains, education, energy, and things that we need to feed, educate, empower the world are obviously going higher. But things that we want, anything you get on the internet, the world's most deflationary invention, are still going lower.
Right. So how do you account for that? Because you're pretty much hardcore inflationista.
Right.
That it's inflation here. You know, Todd makes a great point. You can get an iPod cheaper today than you could a year ago.
But you always could, though. First, I want to thank Todd for inviting me for this charitable, very, very worthy charitable event, and also Yahoo Tech Ticker. But listen. When have you not been able to get cheaper imports from China? Was this a new phenomenon? Look at the price of gold today, hitting an all-time nominal high. If that was indicating deflation, then I'm going to quit and sell hot dogs outside the stock exchange.
But that's a currency debate as well. When you have the euro on the ropes as it is, and you have the government printing more dollars every day to feed the system, you almost have this, it's the least of all possible currency, or the only alternative currency. On top of it, you have India demand, you have natural demand.
Isn't that what inflation is, Todd?
Well, absolutely.
The basing of a currency?
Chasing too few goods, right? I mean,
well, that's higher prices, but inflation is an increase in the money supply. And he just said the dollar's being debased. So, of course that means that gold's expression in dollars is going higher. End of the story.
Well, it's not the end. It's the beginning of the story.
Okay.
Right? It's the beginning of the story because there's an overcapacity, right? I mean, you look at the debt. We talked about on Minionville how quantitative easing is quite possibly the last gas bubble of government.com, right? So we had a banking crisis, a financial crisis turned into an economic crisis, and now it's migrating into a social crisis. Not maybe a crisis in the conventional sense, but it's starting. Societal acrimony.
You have record numbers of people on food stamps.
Right.
50 million people
riots
unemployed in this country.
overseas, the students rioting. So it's manifesting. I don't think the risk is being destroyed. I think it's the perception is changing shape, and it's manifesting in different ways.
Well, what does that have to do with all due respect?
No, that's fine.
What does that have to do with inflation? The debate we're having is, the non-farm payroll report today was horrible. Hours worked were unchanged. Wages were unchanged. Most of the jobs came from the part-time, temporary service sector.
There's no wage
manufacturing
inflation.
Manufacturing is.
If there's no wage inflation, how can there be inflation in the
What's the wage inflation in Zimbabwe? What was the wage inflation in Weimar Germany? What happens is you monetize the debt via a central bank. So you're giving interest payments to people who own debt. It never gets to the people who are receiving a paycheck. Inflation is only so pernicious because it's not evenly distributed.
And I think that's a great word, pernicious. You don't hear that very often.
I just thank you.
Say the magic word in a minute.
But the point being, in terms of risk, and I'm not looking at necessarily, I don't care if I'm right or wrong. What I care about is how do I protect my capital, how do I invest my capital going forward, and how can I help people to navigate what's going on. So when you hear about, yesterday I think somebody came out, Dick Beauvais came out and said, the financial crisis is officially over. And I was like, well, okay.
Run to the hills, I didn't know that.
No, what he said was the private sector,
right,
not the public sector, is just beginning. And that's where you're going to get your hyperinflation, well, at least intractable inflation from.
But my point being, he's right. Now, the government.com, the government now is the one who's carrying the baggage.
Right.
The risk hasn't disappeared. The risk has just changed shape. It's manifested in a different realm. It's moved from the consumer balance sheet from one place to another.
Three-card Monte, right?
Taxpayers are still going to be holding this bag.
Exactly.
And so it's not a question, I think, it's not a question of who's right and who's wrong. I think it's a question of timing and when this comes to play.